Hey friends, welcome back. It is great to be with you. It's been a long time, I know. I ended up having to travel almost the entire month of April for various speaking engagements, but I am happy to be back here with you at Ask Dr. Sexman. Well, let's get right down to our question. Somebody recently asked me via Instagram, what do all those initials in the LGBTQI and others that are occasionally associated with that acronym, what do all those things mean? So I thought we would take an episode and investigate actually quite a few different terms used in the world of sexuality. Point out, I lean pretty heavily for definition of these terms on Mark Yarhouse's book, Understanding Gender Dysphoria, which I would strongly recommend to you if you want to press deeper into more of these terms and what they mean. And he does a great job of one, defining terms, but also helping us see where they intersect and also where they're very different from each other. So I recommend that to you if you're interested. Now, over the last couple of decades, just the sheer volume of vocabulary used in the entire world of sexuality has really exploded, and especially now in the kind of public discourse or the public discussion of sexuality, there's an abundance of terms that didn't used to be used all that frequently. And so I very often have people asking about one term or another. So I thought we would discuss those things today, because the more we discuss them, the clearer our vocabulary is, the better we can understand people and the better we can connect together. Anytime that you get into trying to define words that are used really broadly across culture, that's just a slippery thing to do. So I know that there are ways to understand probably all of these terminologies in slightly different shades of meaning. I'm going to try to give you what I believe are kind of the most mainstream usages of them. Others may have other opinions, and that's perfectly fine. If you happen to be one of those people and you want to share a different perspective on any of these terms, then by all means, please do that in the comments section on YouTube or on our Facebook page, any of those places. As long as you do it civilly and in love, I would love for you to help sharpen all of our focus on these terms if you have something else that you want to add to the conversation. So let's start with the collection of letters that brought this question into our conversation to begin with for this week, and that is LGBT, and we're going to use the letter Q in there as well. So typically the L stands for lesbian, which is generally understood as a woman who is attracted to another woman. The G stands for gay, which is, again, refers to a man who's attracted to another man. B stands for bisexual, and this is where things start to get a little bit broader. That bisexual in this acronym, or in this set of initials, that's a little bit more of an umbrella term. Technically, bisexual stands for somebody who is attracted to both male and female, but the B in the LGBT often includes people who might identify as pansexual or omnisexual. In other words, their attraction extends to people regardless of their sex or gender, and kind of gets outside of the binary understanding of male and female. So anyway, that's what often falls under that B and LGBT moniker. The T is for transgender, which again is another pretty big umbrella kind of term, and really a term for all kinds of ways that people experience or maybe present or express their gender identities that are different from, again, the kind of traditional binary understandings of just male or just female. And then there's the Q. The Q stands for queer. Sometimes people use the term questioning there interchangeably. And it basically stands for anybody else. It's a bit another big umbrella term for anyone else who does not necessarily identify in any of those other categories, the L, G, B, or T. And finally, I might also mention I. Sometimes you will see LGBTI. Sometimes you may see LGBTQI. The I stands for intersex. Now, intersex is a designation for those people who, at birth, their genitalia do not readily allow them to be identified as either male or female. And so that's a different kind of experience for those people. And sometimes they actually don't even want to be identified with the LGBT community, not for any dislike of that community, but just because they believe their situation and their concerns are quite a bit different. But if you see the I, that's what that's in there for. Now, most often when people ask me about terminology, it's questions regarding the conversation that our culture is having right now about gender. And so I wanted to spend some time on that kind of terminology today as well. The first part, the first key term to understand is biological sex. When we refer to someone's biological sex, we're referring to their male or femaleness as they are born. And so we're talking about chromosomes, gonads, sex hormones, internal reproductive anatomy, external reproductive anatomy, those things that people are born with. That's what we refer to as their biological sex. Now, as I already mentioned, it is the case that some people are born as what we may describe as intersex, which means that their biological systems don't readily fit into either the category of male or female. Often they have some characteristics of both. But when we talk about biological sex, we are describing the way that somebody is actually born, the physical characteristics of their body that we usually categorize in the male-female binary. So the next really important term in this discussion, the one that is used all the time and sometimes interchangeably with biological sex, though it really should not be, is the term gender. Gender is the psychological and the social and the cultural aspects of being male or female. So in other words, your biological sex is to do with the organs and the hormones and the chromosomes that you're born with. Gender refers to how we understand ourselves as male or female. And that's a pretty big difference, and that's where people start to discuss what it means to really be male or female. And that's where we come into the term gender identity. Gender identity refers to how do you experience yourself? In other words, how do you understand yourself as male or female? How male or female do you understand yourself? If I understand myself as a man, I am a biological male, but it's how manly am I, or to what extent do I see myself and experience myself as being a man? Then another term that kind of goes in the same discussion is gender role. Gender roles refer to kind of cultural expectations. In other words, what do those of us in, say, North America, since that's where I happen to be, what do we expect it means to be male or female? So all of these different terms kind of play together and interact together, but if we also know how they're different from each other, I think it helps us carry on our conversations a little more precisely. One other term I may toss into this little section of conversation is the term gender binary or gender binarism, and that is the idea that gender falls into exactly two categories and not more than two categories, male and female. And of course, a lot of discussion in our cultural conversation is around the getting outside of those two categories and what it means to experience yourself as something different than strictly male or strictly female. So one term that you've probably come across in the conversation about gender is gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria refers to somebody whose experience of their gender, again, gender is how we experience ourselves as male or female, does not match up with their biological sex. So in other words, a biological male who may experience himself in more of a female way, or a biological female who may experience herself in more of a male way. Dysphoria means there's some incongruence, there's some distress happening there. It doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel good. And so that's what gender dysphoria means. I already mentioned the word transgender, but just to go back over it one more time, transgender is an umbrella term. It's a big, broad term that describes many ways, or kind of holds many ways that people might experience, they might present, they might express, they might live out their gender identity different from those whose sense of gender identity and biological sex is perfectly congruent. I don't know if you've heard the word cisgender, but it's a term that's out there. Cisgender just refers to somebody whose biological sex and their experience of their gender do align or are congruent, and it's kind of a term used so that you can have the opposite of the term transgender. You may have heard the expression gender bending. It's a little bit of a slangish kind of word, but it just means that anybody who is crossing over or kind of bending gender roles could be referred to as gender bending. The term cross-dressing, of course, has been around for quite a while. You're probably somewhat familiar with that. That simply means dressing in the clothing or adopting the presentation of the other biological sex, so a male who dresses as female. People do this for a whole wide variety of different reasons. They may or may not have anything to do with sexual attraction or anything like that, but it simply refers to wearing the clothing of what is typically ascribed to the other biological sex. A term I'm hearing more often, and you may be as well, is third sex or third gender. This is a term that's used to describe someone who is neither man nor woman, or describes himself as neither man nor woman. It could be that they're in some intermediate state of changing their biological sex or gender. Could mean that they have qualities of both a man or a woman, or that they just refuse to be categorized in one of those two binaries. And so third sex or third gender is the term you may hear in that regard. I often have people get confused between the term transsexual and transvestite, so I want to clear that up. A transsexual person is someone who believes that he or she was born in the wrong body, so they experience their life as being stuck in a body of the wrong sex, and they wish to transition or change their sex through hormone treatment, sex reassignment surgery, and so that's a transsexual person. A transvestite, on the other hand, is someone who dresses or adopts kind of the presentation and the actions of the opposite sex, usually for the purposes of sexual arousal. Not necessarily always, but that is usually part of it. These people may or may not experience gender dysphoria. They may or may not identify as transgender. Most transgender people, as I understand it, do not cross-dress for arousal, and they see transvestitism as a very different phenomenon than what they themselves are experiencing. So I just want to make sure we understand that transgender and transvestite are two very different terms. A couple of other terms that kind of go together in maybe a similar way. The term gender fluid and the term gender queer. I hear them frankly used pretty interchangeably, but to kind of try to delineate them a little bit. Gender fluid is a term used to express when someone wants to convey that their experience of their gender is not fixed as either male or female. It may fluctuate along kind of a continuum in between what they understand as male or female, or it may encompass qualities of both at the same time, and so they've just categorically rejected the idea that one must either be male or female. And then gender queer is again another kind of umbrella term for everyone who identifies or experiences their gender identity outside of that male-female binary. And so those are not exactly the same terms. Gender queer is a little bit broader term and actually kind of encompasses gender fluid within it. I might also include the terms drag queen and drag king in this discussion. Transvestites and drag queens are not the same thing either, although again I often hear people kind of speak as though they are. A drag queen is a biological male who dresses as female, usually very flamboyantly so, for the purpose of entertainment. Right? That person may or may not experience any kind of gender dysphoria. They may or may not identify as transgender. I think most often they do not. But a drag queen, and the same thing is true of a drag king, which is a biological female who dresses in stereotypical male, but also for entertainment purposes. So as we wrap up, just a quick word about why Christians should care about understanding this vocabulary. We care about the vocabulary because it's not words in a dictionary. The vocabulary refers to real people, people made by God in the image of God who are dearly loved by God. And our purpose in the world is to express the love of God. And sometimes that means we have to learn new words so that we can understand the experiences that other people are having, even if they are completely foreign to us, or maybe they're ways that help us understand the experiences we're going through. Either way, we need to speak the language of our world, and the language of our world in terms of sexuality is really exploding and expanding. We need to keep up with it so that we can be part of the conversation, we can be part of relationships in people's lives, so that we can very graciously do our best at least to understand the experiences of the people around us. So as always, I want to thank you for joining us at Ask Dr. Sexman. I also want to strongly encourage you to go to the website and submit a question. I would love to talk about your question in one of our future episodes. As we go, please remember that you, my friend, are intentionally made. You are fiercely loved, and I am on your side. We'll see you soon.